In this next, I guess, part of what we're doing, we're going to talk about hydration and electrolytes because Connor is a nerd for it, and I have become a nerd for it as well. But also, we were just talking about nutrition. We're both profusely sweating, and hydration is something that I put a lot of focus on myself, and Connor does too. But it's one of those things that maybe this would be, I could say, possibly even more beneficial for your average person. People really don't understand electrolyte balance is a big thing. That's a big thing. I think that I kind of want to talk about because I don't. Some people don't even know what electrolytes are for a start.
Yeah.
And if we want to I'll let you outline the essential electrolytes if you want to.
Yeah, so you got sodium, potassium would be your two biggest concerns with hydration. And then calcium and magnesium would be your other two notable ones, but less directly correlated with hydration levels.
Yeah. So they're all important in their own way,
Yep.
and there's a lot of interesting things that we could get into. I mean, calcium is a funny one, right? I mean, I don't know if you were a kid, mum told you to drink milk because calcium was good for your bones. It's an interesting one. It's actually a bit out now to kind of go the other way with it, to not go the other way, but to say that basically calcium isn't necessarily that essential for your bones. It doesn't make a massive difference like we thought it did.
Yeah.
Magnesium is something that's become like popularized, right? Everyone pays like $140 to lay in those like bathtubs where the magnesium's in the water,
which you can get for like $8 from your Woolworths or a horse. It's Epsom salts.
Yeah.
So if you want to save yourself some money, go to a horse shop, buy 20 kilos of it for like $20, and that'll last you for a couple of years.
Or do yourself an even bigger favor, considering that from at least what I've read, that you're actually your body is a lot better at absorbing magnesium when you actually take it as a supplement,
100%.
as opposed
I don't actually do Epsom salt baths, just letting you know.
Yeah.
I consume all my magnesium.
In case you were picturing Connor in a bath with candles lit with his Epsom salts.
Yeah,
that's what I was. But no, that's the other thing, right? That people are paying all this money for it, and your body's not actually that efficient at absorbing it through your skin. And some studies have actually shown that you can't absorb it efficiently through your skin at all.
Yeah.
And then people will say things like, "Oh, I felt better after I did it." But to be honest, there's a lot of other aspects to that as well. Even just you're having a bath.
Placebo is also a very powerful thing. It's extraordinarily powerful.
It is, and then when we move into, I wish I'd brought them today. I found when I did the ketogenic diet for 2 months once, just because I wanted to try it. I actually did it with a client because she was doing it, and I did feel good. And hydration, as you would know, becomes not more important, but almost becomes more important because you aren't consuming very many carbohydrates at all. And if you want to feel half decent, you pretty much have to have salt in all your water. Yeah. Otherwise, you don't feel great. Depending on if you're fasting, I did a lot of fasting when I was doing it, but I ended up getting a hold of some potassium, which we've talked about before. You can't actually buy.
No, but I've got a story about that too. Dangerous.
Yeah. I would like to hear that. And so what I got a hold of is called Potassium Plus, and I ended up getting a hold of it at a health food store, and she had to go out the back. The woman that was serving me had to go out the back to go get it, and was very hesitant to sell it to me.
What did they charge you for it? Because it's super cheap. For like,
yeah, it wasn't
legal.
It wasn't expensive. I remember it not being very expensive. Like it would have been like $15, $20, and it was like I think there was like 100 tablets in it. The only reason I have
it's tablet form. Okay, that might be legal. I've got a story from powder form potassium, which has to be weighed very. Like it's one of those things that you have to weigh very. Potassium is generally a normal potassium intake for days. Like some of my bigger guys, they're consuming closer to 10,000 milligrams, but a normal person is going to be in like the 4,000 to 5,500 milligram range ideally. So the amount you're taking is not very much. So if you just grab like a teaspoon or a tablespoon or whatever and dose it like that, you can be in some trouble. So like just people did a pop trivia or whatever. How they kill you in the lethal injections in America is a potassium chloride injection. They give you hyperkalemia, it makes your heart stop. you don't know how to dose your potassium, you dose it by a teaspoon or tablespoon, like I did when I was like 15 or 16, maybe 17, make you really sick.
Did you get really sick?
I got really sick. I didn't figure it out until like years later, until I'd actually learnt more, thought I knew everything back then, realized I didn't know everything. And then I put two and two together, like I was bad for a couple of days.
Yeah,
I
well,
didn't feel good for a couple of days.
heart related.
I felt like I threw up instantly. Like I started throwing up very quickly afterwards. My dumb ass still went to the gym and trained. I fucking still remember doing it. But yeah, I felt like whacked, felt out for the next couple of days. And then like, get a little bit smarter, do some research a few years later, and then I put two and two together and I realized that I'd 110% put myself into a state of hyperkalemia, which can be lethal, which can kill you.
There you go. Connor almost lethal injected himself.
There you go.
Wow.
Orally, but yeah.
Yeah. Jesus.
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting one. I'm sure if it took enough of these tablets, you'd probably be in a bit of
Oh,
trouble as well. Because
110%.
yeah,
Yeah.
you do, I mean, you're already getting enough in your diet. I argue that most of those, like, I think potassium's probably one of the ones you could argue that is for the most part.
If you eat real foods, it's easy to get in. The
Right.
issue is that so much of society eats like
Dodgy.
95%, or even like, honestly, like there are probably a good amount of families that go an entire week without eating a single unprocessed piece of food.
Mm,
Like I've seen, like you walk around shops and you see some people's carts. And it's like there is not actually a single real piece of food in your shopping cart. Every single piece of food in there has been processed.
yeah.
And it's not to say that you can't have processed foods from time to time. There's nothing wrong with having some stuff that tastes good. You can make unprocessed food taste good, by the way, as well. A lot of people seem to think that you can't. But it shouldn't be making up 100% of your diet. And as we fall back on, if you just eat the predominantly unprocessed foods, the micronutrients profiles tend to take care of themselves for the most part. You can get yourself to a pretty good spot across the board with micronutrients without really thinking about anything other than just eating real food.
Mm. Well, I mean, this is kind of a good place to be because it leads well into sodium. Because sodium is obviously extremely present in
Yeah.
processed foods, right? But there's
Yes.
different kinds.
Yeah, and extremely, and look, this is one thing that I see in a lot of my clients, especially when they move over to like working with me with minimally processed foods, is it is extraordinarily abundant in processed foods, but it is extremely difficult to get in unprocessed foods.
Mm.
So it is a micronutrient that in the general population is heavily overconsumed. And in the small population of people that probably actually have a higher sodium requirements, to your athletes and whatnot, if they're unaware of the fact that their diet is likely to lack in sodium due to the lack of processed foods in the diet, typically end up under consuming salt. So if you're consuming predominantly unprocessed foods, you do need to make sure that you're salting the majority of your meals because you will not get sufficient sodium intake. Or, you can go the route of, say, consuming a large amount of sodium pre and intra workout is another way you can kind of deal with safeguarding to make sure you get sufficient sodium for hydration if you're consuming a predominantly unprocessed diet. But yeah, that is where, like, depending on your food choices, you can have a massive variance. Because as you're saying, like, processed foods, it is super abundant. But if you're eating real foods, it's not really there. You're not getting it in very almost anything.
Yeah, I mean, I salt the fuck out of everything I eat. So, like, and that's something I learned a while ago. And I definitely think that pretty like you hit the nail on the head, man. It's hard. It's like a double-edged sword, because you're trying to eat better, but in eating better, you're lacking in certain areas. But that's just where it comes down to the education side of things, and also understanding something like supplementation, which is a whole nother thing we will get into separately. But electrolytes, if they are something that for whatever reason you are struggling to consume with food, and let's say you're still salting your food, and for whatever reason you're a high-end athlete, or you could be a marathon runner, and you still need more, that's where it becomes important to become educated about supplementation because there's plenty of supplements out there that can help you with this sort of thing. Even sometimes as far as like every single day, personally, I will use some form of like electrolyte water that will be I use like a 0-calorie one. It's some random like gym brand. I'm happy with the amount of electrolytes that are in it, but I will have that when I go for a walk in the morning. because
Yep.
I'll go for summer is way more prevalent. Winter, it's not that I don't ever do it. I will probably more so do it when I'm training. But in summer, we're sweating, right? Me and you are sweating right now. I'm
Yep.
sweating when I'm
I
walking in the
believe
morning.
with anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we know the thing is, we know that people will then immediately reach for the water bottle. More water, more water, more water. Less salt, less
Yep.
less electrolytes in
100%.
general. I have a headache. I feel dehydrated.
Yep.
And then there's the bigger problem. So I think
Yeah. So I think like just to like quickly point on that, hydration comes down to fluid intake and electrolyte intake. You can consume sufficient fluid and still be dehydrated. The two go to hand in hand. You have to be consuming adequate of both. You can be over, like to some degree, if you're consuming too much fluid, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Like for as a part of like for a weight class sport where we water cut, that's why we implement a water load at the beginning portion of a water cut, is because we were able to produce low electrolyte environment as well as manipulating aldosterone by over consuming the water and flushing out more of the electrolytes
mm,
and inducing a state of dehydration through consuming more fluid. So
which can become dangerous, which is kind of the point we're making.
yeah,
Like, and also not to mention, this is where people will experience other kinds of symptoms too that may not be as severe, like cramping.
yeah,
For example, just even things like that. If you're finding that you're cramping a lot when you're training or when you're running or when you're just in the gym, there's more to that than just I've got a cramp and it happens to me. I shrug stuff
or
off
it's
because
normal.
yeah,
That's another thing. Like
yeah,
just because it's normal for you, normal for other people, doesn't mean it should be happening. A lot of people, as a whole, we're quite unhealthy. Most people in this world are not the picture of health. So what people consider as normal shouldn't necessarily be considered as healthy because a normal person isn't healthy. Just because a lot of people cramp when they're exercising doesn't mean you should be cramping when you're exercising. It's happening for a reason.
mm. And yeah, sometimes it's important to understand something as a symptom as opposed to just being observant. Being observant without uh, recognition isn't efficient. I can observe plenty of things in my life, but without being able to recognize something when I'm observing it so that I can then try and treat it, I have nothing. Otherwise that is just, it's like saying I don't have enough money in my bank account and I want to have more money, but then doing nothing to try to be more stable financially and try to save money and be less, there's always things you can do to improve your financial situation. There's always things you can do to improve your health, to improve your sleep, to improve your training, and you are in control of those things. So caring about these sorts of things is an important aspect of what you are doing because you're a human being and hydration is an extremely important part about what we do.
Yeah.
So I think people, once again, as we spoke about meal timing, it can be taken less seriously, but it's something that I know I'm passionate about, and it's something that me and Connor both, you know, I know that I speak to my clients a lot about it, and obviously you do as well. We want people to be performing well, and the last thing I do is, you know, if a session's bad, the last question I'm asking is, what exercises did they do, or did they do something wrong, or has it got anything to do with like my immediate thing most of the time, almost every time? What did you eat beforehand? Were you hydrated? Did you hydrate during your session? They're my go-to questions for a lot of people because 90% of the time it's I was busy at work and I didn't
Yeah.
eat enough.
Yeah. 100%. Like, for that reason, I run a daily questionnaire with all of those questions in a metric tracking sheet for all my clients so that I can keep track of those things and go, all right, well, there was a shitty training session here. There was a 2 out of 5 sleep rating for that night. That's probably related instead of having, these random shitty training sessions and having to try and figure out, what went wrong. So having this kind of data track consistently is going to allow you to kind of see, what's consistently causing downticks in training performance and maybe where, the areas that need to be addressed first in order to bring that training performance back up.
Absolutely. That is going to be the end of segment 3.